And I bring greetings from our Australian team. We have the equivalent together. It's called Movement Australia. And I'm part of that team where we're working with cities right across our nation to build unity and mission as well. But I've been working in my city of Toowoomba. Toowoomba is in Queensland. It's about 150,000 people, and I've been working there for the last 22 years to mobilise the women together, to go into the pain, to hear the cry of our city and to move into the pain of our city. 50 years ago, my father, Letitia Shelton, planted a church in Toowoomba. And God had spoken to him that there would be one church in the city, many congregations, but one church. And to celebrate planting that church, my parents conceived me, which is fantastic. So I'm 49 years old now, and all I've ever known is the theology of a city. All I've ever known is being a part of a church that wants to reach a city. And so it's been an amazing journey in my lifetime. And so when I started pastoring in Toowoomba in the year 2002, I pastored with a heart to pastor not just our church, but our city, and began City Women. But I love working with women because we need both genders, don't we? We need the whole church with the whole gospel to the whole city. And women represent the female image of Jesus. Jesus is both male and female. And when we only have one side, we have a lopsided Jesus. And women bring something different to reaching our cities. Okay, this clicker's not going to... Can we get this? So, yeah, here we go. Great. Women hear the cry and run to the pain. Not to say that men don't. I've seen a lot of amazing men hear the cry and cry as well. But women, naturally, we've been created to hear the cry. I've just been with my brother and sister-in-law and their family down in Hampshire the last few days, and they have 4 little children, and the minute one child cries, it's the mother who hears the cry. The mum and the dad are both in the same room, but you'd think my brother is off in Lululand somewhere. He doesn't hear the cry, the scream. It's the mother who's up and running, and the child runs to the mother generally. Generally, again, we're speaking. But again, if you look at the scientific research, women's bodies are wired to hear a cry. Something goes off in our bodies when we hear the cry. And it's the same in our cities. Women hear the cry, they hear the pain, and we need to release women out of the churches to hear the cry, because there is one almighty cry that is going on in our city. And this is where it began for me in 2002. We heard a cry from the mayor of our city. She came and spoke to a group of women in our city, and she said, "You ladies are doing great thing inside your churches, but why don't you get outside the effing walls of your church and do something for the young people of our city?" It was the cry of the city leaders who are like, "What the heck is the church doing? Do something." And if God can speak through a donkey, he'll speak through a swearing mare. And so we got together as women. We heard her cry and we thought, well, she's right. We need to get out into our community. And so we began running camps for teenage girls. We began taking away girls from our community. And to this day, I've run 71 camps for teenage girls. And that first camp we ran, we just worked with school chaplains, and we took away 20 girls up to the mountains. And during that camp, I was sitting with 5 girls between the ages of 12 and 14, and each one of them shared about abuse in their life. And by the time we got to the 5th girl, she looked at me and said, Letitia, we've all been abused. We need help." I heard another cry in our city. I heard a cry of the abused. The pain in our city is pulsating, and quite often the church doesn't hear it because we're just so... the cry of the city is drowned out with so much of our religious activity. But there is a deep cry, and so we began to rally the women. That's where I began to rally and form City Women and go, we've got to work together, because the pain of our city is over here and the church is over here, and we've got to bring the two together. It's not good enough that just the Salvation Army or a few parachurch ministries are doing things, but we've got to release the church into the pain of the city. And then we've got to create an environment where the pain can come out. You know, it's not good that pain is kept in us. It's not good that we walk around with it. And so part of what we've learnt during these camps over the years is to bring in a man. It's usually been my dad, because many of these girls have been sexually abused. They've been rejected by fathers. They've been hurt by boyfriends. And so we bring in a man to come in and apologise on behalf of men who've caused pain. These are to non-Christian girls who don't understand anything, but finally, for the first time in their life, there is somebody who's acknowledging that what happened to them was wrong. Because so many times when you've been abused, you've been told, don't you dare say anything. You've been silenced. This is your fault. If you speak up, I'll leave you. I'll leave your mother. And so to have someone stand in the gap, and that has helped release, again, a cry in our city, releasing the pain, giving an environment where these young teenage girls can just weep and weep, just like we saw. Jesus provides a space for the broken to come to him and weep. Jesus provides that space. Are the Church of Jesus Christ, are we providing a space in our city for the broken to come and weep? Are we providing a space in our churches? Are we talking about these issues in our churches? This is Sunday morning talk now. We're living in a time where abuse is just rife. There is a cry in our city that demands the ears of the church. The church is just not the hands and the feet of Jesus. We are also the ears. And so we have to absorb. Now, it's not for everybody. It's not everyone's ministry, but there are people in the church that are called to absorb the pain and listen. This can't just happen in counselling offices. Now, I'm all for counselling. That's important. But again, the church has got to provide a place, or our cities will implode unless they release the pain and the cry to the church. We're the ears of Jesus. Back in 2017, you might remember the Me Too movement. The world provided a space for people to share their pain, where one woman in Hollywood just tweeted and shared her story of abuse and just encouraged other women. And then for days, weeks, years, we heard stories come out, didn't we? And I remember just in my own city, sitting on Facebook and reading the stories coming up, and I thought, I just don't want to read this on Facebook. I want to meet these people. And so I put this ad up on my Facebook page and said, if you've got a story of abuse, if you live in Toowoomba, come to this cafe and we want to hear your story. I had no idea if anyone would turn up. I like coffee, so I thought, well, if no one turns up, I'll have a nice coffee. I'd made sure some other Christian women turned up. And that night, 40 women from our city turned up that I didn't know, never met in my life. My mayor came along. I told him what I was doing. He's got such a passion for broken women, and he just said a few words at the beginning and left and just really encouraged women to speak up. And then we sat there for the next 3 hours listening to story after story after story, hearing the cry of our city. Women who would never walk into a church. After each woman shared, I had a Christian woman stand up and just acknowledge them and say, thank you. I've heard you. You know, we heard about Lamentations in that last drama. The tragedy of Lamentations 1, and it says it about 5 times, there was no one to listen. There is no one to listen. There is a church that has got to begin to listen and unlock the pain on a whole level. We don't have enough counsellors and psychologists to meet one-on-one. We've got to find ways to release a corporate cry and allow our city to heal. And that night was powerful. And again, I'd arranged for my friend John. I said, John, if it's appropriate, can you come in at the end and just apologise on behalf of men? John sat in the foyer of the coffee shop for 3 hours and listened to every one of these stories through the crack of the door. And I texted John and said, okay, John, you're up next. John walked in weeping. He just wept and he stood up, and again, he just delivered the most beautiful apology from a man I've ever heard. And it just allowed for healing to happen. And so we've got to find ways again to release the pain of our city. We've got to listen to our city. As I've been gathering women every year, or a couple of times a year, as I gather the women across the churches, we call them a City Women Breakfast. We gather to keep hearing the pain, the issues, to keep mobilising the women. A couple of years ago, I thought, I just need a keynote speaker for this breakfast. And we've had a team that has been ministering into the brothel. Our manager was Nola then, and I thought I'm going to ask Nola to be our keynote speaker. You know, generally, if you're organising a women's breakfast, you have someone really spiritual come and speak, don't you? Like the pastor's wife or the Bible study leader. But that morning we had Nola come because, again, we've got to humanise what is going on we've got to humanise these people. They're people worth listening to. They have something to say. The non-Christians in our city have something to say to the Christians. Are we humble enough to listen to them? the ones that maybe we judge and we keep away from and we think they've made foolish decisions. And so Nola had worked all night at the brothel, came directly to our breakfast, sat right on the edge. She'd never been around 250 Christian women. And when it was her turn, she stood up and she said, "Before you ladies call forth fire from heaven on me," because that's how they think the church views them, she said, "I just want to tell you my story. I was adopted into a pedophile ring as a young girl in Australia. She was adopted into a pedophile ring, abused all her life, became pregnant at the age of 12, had 4 sons in her teenage years. Of course you're going to go work at a brothel. 90% of sex workers in brothels have been abused. Many of them go into that because they think, well, we may as well get paid." And so finally she had met our team who were dressed in white. Nola's in the coloured shirt there. And she had found these Christians who were willing to come in and out of the brothel and build relationship and love on her and listen to her. So often, because there's such a high turnover of sex workers, but we build great relationships with the managers and we just listen because they need someone to debrief when you're managing an outfit like that. It's full on. It was Nola's 43rd birthday that day. And I'd asked Jess to bring one gift for Nola. Well, Jess arranged for 43 gifts to come. We brought them out in a wheelbarrow. Nola broke down into tears. 250 women stood to their feet and gave her a standing ovation. And again, something significant happened in our city as we said, "Nola, you belong." So often in the church we say, "Come and believe and then you belong." But God says, "No, you belong. You belong. You're a part of us, whether you're going to believe or not, aren't you?" Well, the good news is Nola was so impacted that day that, a few weeks later, she did give her life to Jesus. And then women were saying, "Well, we need to get Nola out of the brothel. She's a Christian." And I said, "Isn't it great that we have a Christian as the manager of our brothel? Isn't that awesome?" No, you don't think so, do you? You English people are hard. Well, it messes with our religiosity, doesn't it? And I think sometimes we just got to let God sort stuff out. And he did. Nola got fired because she was reading her Bible at the front desk, okay? So we didn't have to worry about it. God works it out. Just do the journey with people. Let's not be so religious and set in our ways. Let's just do the journey. We got her out of the brothel and we got her a job on our local Christian radio station as the morning announcer. Which was really fun listening to our brothel manager. There's a new manager at the brothel now, and Debbie, who's on this side, you're right, Debbie's husband just passed away, unfortunately, from cancer. And I was messaging Debbie the other day, and she said, "Oh, the manager of the brothel's over at the moment doing our gardening." Because we've become a church that listens, that goes in, loves, listens, absorbs their pain. That's what we're called to do. There's a cry in our city that demands the ears of the church. It's a missional act to listen. Did you know that? It's a missional act just to listen without even having to give a Bible verse back or even having to pray for them. It's a missional act where the ears of Jesus. Is the church of our city known for listening? Or do we talk a lot? I've been involved in the nation of Fiji. 30 years ago, our family lived in Fiji. And I went to school. You should be able to see me in that picture. If you can't, please go to the eye doctor. I'm not going to explain why my hair looks like I've been through a cyclone. That's another story. But their buses have no windows. So by the time I got to school, my hair was all over the shop. But 30 years later, God actually knows what he's doing. And I probably spent half of my year in Fiji as well, just taking everything I've learnt from Toowoomba over to Fiji, beginning to we started a unity group in the capital city, Love Suva, we call it. But Fiji is a nation, less than 1 million people. 64% go to church, so they still declare themselves as a Christian nation. Yet 2 out of 3 women are raped. 4 out of 5 children are abused. 72% of the perpetrators attend church. Everything is covered up in shame and silence. God forbid that we talk about any of our issues at all. And so I've been able to come in, and as I began to go in 3 years ago, I just started to listen. Started to listen to my friends, my school friends, hear their stories. So many of them been through brokenness, abuse. And so I thought, well, let's write a story. So we've written a story called The Disruptive Voices of Fijian Women, disrupting the culture of silence, the culture of shame, giving those without a voice in a culture that has just silenced every form of abuse, that has just covered so much up. We're now beginning to bring, something powerful happens when you bring the pain to the surface. And the church doesn't like to do that. We want everything to be good news, don't we? You know, how many times on a Sunday do we get up and say, does anyone have a good news story? You know, I wish somebody would say, did anyone have a crap week? Does anyone want to share their sucky stories today? Like, can we just have some reality, please? Can we? As the manager of our domestic violence centre in my city, she told a group of pastors, she said, you think you have no abuse in your church? It's because you don't talk about it. And when we don't talk about these things, they don't get brought up. No one feels permission to share their story, their struggle with pornography, their issues of abuse. And so can we create churches that are really dealing with real life issues, the things that our young people are coming to, they're struggling with? Are we answering the questions that they're dealing with? And so Fiji has been an amazing journey. This lady, I mean, a lot of the women in the book, they use different names because, again, it's the shame of sharing their stories, losing family members, being ostracised. But this is Melly. On the other photo, she shared her story. She's been all over national television. She gets asked to speak everywhere because she was abused by the next door neighbour's father, her friend, and she was told, if you ever tell anybody, I will kill you, at the age of 12. Imagine a little girl carrying that around at the age of 12, still turning up to church, still seeing this perpetrator day in, day out, and having nowhere to absorb her pain. Finally, at the age of 32, she hears this white woman calling for Fijian women to share their stories, and she stood up and she shared. The other thing is, we've just written a book on the stories of men. If 4 out of 5 children are abused, that means a lot of little boys are abused. A lot of little boys. And little boys who carry trauma grow up to be abusive. They're not the monsters. They're not our opposition at all. Who is hearing the stories of our little boys? Who is hearing the pain of our men? You know, we see that the UK has a huge issue with domestic violence. Well, what's the pain going on in their lives? Last year when I was in Fiji, one of my school friends was murdered. Her husband picked up the kitchen knife and stabbed her to death. Tragic. Yes, and we mourn the loss of a school friend, but I actually sat there and thought, what is going on in that man's life? What trauma has he carried for the last 30 to 40 years that nobody has ever untapped? He's probably gone and sat in church week in, week out because they're a Christian nation, but no one has bothered to ask him, what's going on in your life? What are you carrying? What are you watching? What has happened? Who has touched you? No one's ever asked that. We don't ask these questions. And so, man, the men of the UK, they're in pain and it comes out through violence. That's an indication of deeper issues. Yes, the enemy's at work, but there's unhealed trauma. And how's the church going to heal their pain? Because men don't talk about these things, do they? But we've got to be courageous. Maybe you've got to share your own stories here in the room. There'll be stories here that you've never shared. I was at a church yesterday where at the end the pastor got up and shared his story, and some of the women said, I've never heard my pastor share that before. Well, hallelujah, he finally did. But man, can we get a bit more honest about our own journey? There's so much trauma. Helping our men heal. And this is Ben. I'd done 6 weeks in Fiji last year, and he was taking me to the airport, and I just said, Lord, I can't hear another story. Ben hops in the car and he says, can I tell you my story? Because people tell me because they know I talk about this and they know I'm safe. And I'm not related to them because they're all cousins as well. And Ben's story was he was molested by his school teacher in a school. Growing up in a pastor's family, going to church every week, but no one. So finally I said, well, can I put it in the book? Yes. And so now again, it's gone public, but it unlocks something. Lifeline, which is a phone counselling service in Fiji. My friend leads Lifeline in Fiji, and he said, Letitia, when you released that book, we were inundated with men calling us. They'd read your book, they'd heard these stories, they'd seen it all over the media, and finally something was being unlocked across our nation where they felt like they could ring and get help. But man, the Church of Jesus Christ should be this place. We should be known as the ones where they can come and be helped and not judged and find freedom. But we're usually the last place they go to, aren't we? Unfortunately. Unfortunately, I'm going to skip a little bit of this. So we listen. My next project in Fiji is writing a book on sex, dating and relationships. This is our team of writers. We're using local people because someone just doesn't become an abuser when they're in their 40s or their 50s. It starts in their dating relationships. And as I listen to young people, and I do a lot of work in the schools in Fiji, well, no, they don't even know what a healthy relationship looks like. They haven't seen it in their family. They're not seeing it in the church. The church is silent. So we're putting together a book written by Fijians for Fijians. In Australia, I can walk into a Christian bookstore and pick up so many resources on these issues by white people for white people, but there's nothing like this in their culture. So we're doing a book, Sex, Dating, Relationships and Everything in Between, trying to get to them at a young age, speaking to them on the destructive powers of pornography. What's God's intentions for sexuality? What if you're struggling with same-sex issues? All those issues. What if you're pregnant? By the age of 18, 1 in every 6 Fijian girls, teen girls, will be pregnant. And so the church has got to rise up. And I'm thankful for courageous young people who are willing. We want to get this into the hand of every Fijian young person between the ages of 14 and 25. I love to ride my bike. I'm a cyclist. This is where I am when I'm not on a plane traveling around the world. And next year I'm training to ride my bike across America, 6,000 kilometres. It's 3,700 miles I worked out today, raising money to make sure we get that book so they don't have to buy it, so we can just give it out into the hands of every young person across that nation to change a culture, to get something healthy into their hands. Just quickly, as I've said, men have a huge role to play in healing of our women. You know, I've talked about the men who do the apologies. That's powerful. We talk that, sometimes it's hard when I talk because the men in the room feel really, oh my gosh, we're the problem to everything. Well, maybe you've caused some problems, but you're also a huge answer. Healthy men of God. You don't have to be perfect. Maybe you've had a story, but the men are powerful in the healing of broken women in our society. And I've just seen this again and again. Yep, through the apologies. We had an old couple a few years ago. I wanted to stop all the old people in my city from buying caravans and travelling around Australia because Australia is so long, and when you begin to travel, you don't come back for 3 months. So we wrote a book, No Use By Date. If you're not dead, you're not done. And we wanted to keep our old people still in our city, active and giving back. And grandparents are the greatest untapped resources, male and female. And so part of our camps that we did, we started to do follow-ups, and I kind of started a Tuesday night for non-Christian girls, a Tuesday night church, because they're not going to come to Sunday church. They're from broken families. They're in between families on the weekend, they're in sport, and so we started a Tuesday night and we brought in grandparent couples to be a part of that. This is Derek and Nancy. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, and they didn't want to party with all their friends. They celebrated it at our teen church with the girls, because again, we've got to show girls the beauty of marriage, don't we? The church has to show them something better. We've got to show them what it looks like. And I remember one of the girls sitting there in the picture. She got up and she said, "Thank you, Derek and Nancy. Thank you for making it for 50 years. My parents made it to 5 years and it screwed my life up. Screwed my life up." And so the church is to be a family, a healing family that gathers our young people together. So many of those girls asked our grandparents to walk them down the aisle when they got married. Many of these grandfathers were driving the girls to their proms. We were attending birthday parties, baby showers, you name it. It was the Church of Jesus in a city, being a family, not a program that goes from this time to this time, a family that's on call anytime, all from different churches. Amazing. At the end of every year, we do a dinner for the prostitutes, and we bring in some good young guys that we know and love and trust. And they just come and they serve the women. They dance with the women. I was so thankful that the women from the strip club kept their clothes on that night. But they dance, they have fun. But I tell you, at the end of the night, these women are like, it is so nice to be around men who don't want anything from me. It's so simple, but so profound to experience men who just treat them like sisters, As I finish, I get around the globe as well. I was in India last year, speaking at Disruptive Women India. So again, there's a movement like this across India. I mean, they're sitting down and they're strategizing. These women, there were about 90 women from 17 different cities, and they're strategizing how to disrupt their darkness of their cities with 12 million people. You know, you can't even comprehend. India is a nation where every 8 seconds a child goes missing due to sex trafficking. But when I landed in India, I had a few days in Calcutta. I had one day to look around, to be a tourist. And my Indian friend said, well, Letitia, what do you want to go see tomorrow? And I said, can you please take me to the darkest place in your city? Because when I go and speak, it's nice to actually comprehend what people are dealing with, hey? You can go to a tourist spot and it doesn't really show you. She said, okay, we still have a temple that sacrifices babies. I was like, ooh, okay, sure. So we got in a taxi and drove down to the heart of Calcutta. The taxi driver wouldn't even drop us off at the temple. He just dropped us off at an alleyway and we began to walk down, and there was the Ganges River. And again, I don't know if you know what you know about India, but one of my heroes is Mother Teresa, and I've read a lot about her over the years. And the Ganges River, where quite often when they had a baby girl, they'd throw them into the water just because they didn't want a girl, they wanted a boy. I said, is that still happening today? Are people still throwing their baby girls into the Ganges? Yes. And then just over the hill from the Ganges was all these kind of iron huts, corrugated iron huts. And I said, what's happening over there? And my friend said, well, when a girl is sex trafficked, that's where they're conditioned. They're raped, they're drugged over there. Oh, that man over there, he's a pimp. Oh, those girls, they're prostitutes. So we hadn't even made it to the temple yet. Then there was a group of men sitting on the floor playing cards as we were walking by. And I said, oh, that's nice of the men to come out and have a card game in the afternoon. She said, no, right now they're gambling off their women and their children. Then we turned the corner and we saw one of Mother Teresa's homes, the home for the destitute and the dying. And I've grown up reading about Mother Teresa and about this home, and I just said, oh man, are we allowed to go in there? And she said, yeah, we can. So we knocked on the door. These little nuns came out, answered the door, these women, just as joyful as anything, come in. On one side of the building was 100 men who are just dying. They pick up people who are dying from the street. They give them help and dignity in their death. 100 men just on stretchers. It was clean, it was beautiful, dying. 100 women on the other side, dying. These nuns just smiling, as joyful, just serving. And on the front of the house, a sign, let us do something beautiful for God. Let us do something beautiful for God. In the midst of darkness, in the midst of the Ganges River, the men conditioning these women who have been sex trafficked, these men gambling off their mothers. We hadn't even made it to the temple that are sacrificing babies, but here's Mother Teresa with a home picking up the dying and the destitute. Let us do something beautiful for God. May that be the legacy that we leave in our city. Unity is beautiful. Mission is beautiful. Hearing the cry and the pain of our city is beautiful. There will be no beauty unless we allow the voice of the pain. We cannot cover up the voice of the pain. I'm sorry, we can't escape it. We're going to have to hear a lot more pain and brokenness in our cities before we get to the beauty. But it's worth wading through, because that's when we'll find true freedom, true hope, true help. So thank you so much, and God bless you.